Joining me now is Rex Nelson of the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, Shane Broadway of Arkansas State University System. They are two of our go-to political animals, and we are glad to have you with us. We got a lot to cover, guys. You guys are making up a lot of the show this week. Let's start at the national level, and let's talk about the presidential election. You got to get 270 to win. I could calculate it a million different ways. Rex, I want you to tell me what's the state of the race a couple of days before election day, and will we have an early night or a late night or a late week for results?
I think it's going to be a big night for Joe Biden. I think it's going to be an early night, Roby. But again, I will say at the start, I was the guy that went on television with you on election night 4 years ago and said it was going to be a big night for Hillary Clinton. And obviously, maybe it was a big night, but it was also a bad night for Hillary Clinton then. So, I will preface that and say I'll be humble in this prediction, but everything I see is pointing to a very, very big night for Biden. You look at the early voting, you see that they're young voters, you see that they're urban voters, you see that they're minority voters, and that all points to a blue wave to me.
All right. What about you, Shane? Do you see the same thing that Rex is, or do you think that you got a different prediction on election night?
I don't know if I'm ready to go as far as Rex has. I still see, I kind of like you mentioned a minute ago, I still see some different possibilities of different scenarios. I think certainly as we sit here today, Biden has the edge. But like Rex said, everybody thought sitting there election night in 2016 that Hillary Clinton was going to win. So I don't write Donald Trump off ever. And so until we see all of the counts, I'm not ready to say it's a shoe in one way or the other. I think there are possibilities that Biden wins the popular vote by a lot and still could lose the election because of the Electoral College, depending on some of these swing states. But I think Rex makes a good point. And I think the key is going to be, and I've thought about this a lot the last several days, is we've seen this huge surge of early voting. And a lot of the conversations I've had this week is that because early voting is a big thing and election day is not going to be that big of a deal? You're not going to have as many people because everybody's already early voted. I think that's really going to be the key, is how many people vote on election day. And I've kind of joked this week, Rex said something about it being an early night. I think it could be a long night, and we may end up spending election night talking about food and football instead of election returns.
All right. So two divergent opinions there. I want to walk through some of the swing states for you. And I kind of going to clump them in some different categories here. But you've got Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina over there in the Southeast. And the polling in those state polls is pretty tight. You see Trump plus 1 or 2. You see Biden plus 1 or 2. I don't see a blowout in any three of those, but they could all three stay in the Trump category from 2016, or they could all flip, or some combination of them could flip to Biden. Out west, you've got Arizona, which seems to be off of the Trump map with all the state polling. And I put Wisconsin and Michigan in that category too, just looking at the state polling. So those are three states to me that come off of the Trump map pretty quickly on election night. And as Rex indicated, you get those southeastern states, and all of a sudden you got something going there in a big blue wave. But if that doesn't happen, then it really all signs to me point to Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a state that Trump has to have to stay in the game, and it's a state that Biden needs to win to lay those dominoes down for the rest of it. Somebody argue with me on that, with me or against me.
Pennsylvania is, to use the old James Carville saying, is Philadelphia on the east, Pittsburgh on the west, and Alabama in between. It is a very rural state in the middle where Trump will do well. But with these big turnouts, Roby, I think, again, that plays to Joe Biden in Pennsylvania, because you see those turnouts in urban areas. And in those urban areas of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, they're not really, they don't care what Joe Biden said about fracking, to be honest with you. That's more in those rural areas of Pennsylvania where that is an issue. And it's the one thing that the Trump people had to hang their hat on after the last debate, saying, boy, this was some huge mistake that Joe Biden made. And again, I just don't see it having that big a negative effect on him come election day. For one thing, even by that last debate, we'd already had more than 50 million votes nationwide already cast. Now you're up over 60, 70 million votes already cast.
Nuts. Shane, what do you think about Pennsylvania being pivotal?
I think Rex is right. I think prior to the third debate, that was probably solidly in the Biden category. I think the comments he made about fracking and moving away from oil gave the Trump team an inroad they did not have at the moment to try to make some inroads in Pennsylvania, maybe put it back into play. But like Rex said, I think you've had so many votes. Is there enough to make a difference, enough time for it to really make a difference? And that's, I think, the whole key to what you're talking about there, Roby, with a lot of these swing states is, are we seeing with all of this early voting and if it continues all the way through Tuesday, then you could be talking about a potential wave that's out there because of just the sheer number of people. It's been amazing to watch these last couple of weeks, just the sheer number of people going to vote and voting early and absentee and mail in and all of that. It's unlike anything we've seen before. Big question is, what impact does that have on Tuesday, and how many people still are going to go to vote on Tuesday?
Yeah, and I've looked at some of that data from some of those other states as best I can, because you just can't get rich material everywhere, but you can get some in some places. Arkansas, for example, we're seeing some big early vote numbers here in Arkansas, but it's not, as Rex indicated, as what's happening in Texas and Georgia. It's not young people that are voting early here. It's not first time or new voters that are voting here. It tends to be older voters. I just think that's a shift from election day voting to an earlier in the process, not wanting to miss out on their chance. Whereas Texas and Georgia is seeing some new, young, diverse, college educated, first time voters. I just get both of your takes. Shane, I'll come to you first on this. What happens if Texas and or Georgia go to the Democrats? What does that signal seismically for national politics?
Oh, it's over. And I think if Texas goes to the Democratic column now, and I think if it continues to grow, it really complicates the map for Republicans in the next several cycles because Texas is that huge state with a huge delegate-rich count that makes a significant difference. So if it goes, and the fact that Texas and Georgia are even in play really tells you about the demographic shifts of both of those states. Obviously, Latino voters are going to make a huge impact in Texas. Where do they end up going? Trump does have some support in the Latino community in Texas. How big of support it is, Biden's number is not as strong as what most people would think it would be with that community in Texas. So that's going to be a real interesting dynamic to watch. But certainly, if Texas goes, that changes the political dynamic for several years to come.
Rex, does it speed up this implosion of the Republican Party that some Republicans, you may be one of them, have cheered for in terms of let's just do a reset in the post-Trump world?
Yeah, I think it really does. Texas fascinates me. It's right next door to us, of course. My wife happens to be a Texan, so I happened to spend the bigger part of a day last week reading Texas Monthly magazine's election issue. And I've got to tell you, I was really fascinated by some of the things in there. And one I did not realize, Roby, is if you take the Dallas-Fort Worth metropolitan area, the Houston metropolitan area, the Austin metropolitan area, and the San Antonio metropolitan area, you are now talking about 69% of the vote in the state of Texas. Texas is becoming an urban state now. It's not that old Western cowboy state of legend of the movie Giant anymore. Texas is an urban state. Houston may be the most diverse city in the country. In the Houston public schools, there are more than 100 languages spoken by students as their first language. And again, all of that is tracking Biden. So I think Biden has a very good chance in Texas. I think he'll win Georgia with the growth in the Atlanta area and the Atlanta suburbs. I have one son who lives in Austin. I have another son who lives in Atlanta. So maybe a little bit of a feel for those two places. And I agree with Shane. If we see Texas and Georgia both go into the Democratic column, you're also going to see pickups in the legislatures in those states. And I think it really bodes well for a long-term change, at least in parts of the state, for the Democratic Party. You'll still have Arkansas strongly Republican. You'll still have Mississippi strongly Republican. But in those big population states, in a Florida, in a Georgia, in a Texas, in places like that, there's going to be a lot of rebuilding for the GOP to do. I think the 4 years of the Trump administration, the damage to the party has been very, very deep.
I'll stay with you on this question. Do you think that there is still a shy Trump voter out there, somebody that's not answering these polls, somebody that's throwing these polls off? Is it a big enough sample or percentage of what's out there that it's going to show up on election day in the results, but it's not out there now in the polling?
I think in Arkansas, Roby, and if we're bringing it back to Arkansas, I think in Arkansas, you're more likely to have shy Biden voters than shy Trump voters, because they're the people here who are going to be in the minority. And some of the Trump voters are so aggressive on Facebook, on Twitter, on other social media. I think that drives people, frankly, to be a little more shy for Biden in Arkansas than it does for Trump.
Shane, you want to weigh in on that subject?
I think Rex makes a great point there. I mean, the Trump supporters that I know are not shy about their support of President Trump. So, but do they respond to polls? Do they answer the polls call? You know, it's a good question. Do they trust the polls? Obviously, the polling, 4 years ago was not on. It was not correct, and that they didn't account for. And now I think a lot of these polling guys have learned from their mistake from 4 years ago. Have tried to account for the best they can what they didn't account for 4 years ago. So I think the polls are probably a little bit closer than what they were then in terms of being closer to that more what realistic number we're going to see. But there is that possibility that there are people who just are not going to participate in polls because they think it could sway something one way or the other.
Well, I can tell you, as somebody who does a lot of polling, those Trump voters are not shy about registering their support in the state of Arkansas for sure.
Yeah, I definitely agree on the Arkansas part. You can tell.
Yeah, they are not shy at all. I wrote a column a few months back that was pretty anti-Trump, and I heard from every one of them. I can
All right, let's talk about control of the U.S. Senate. That is clearly in play in this election. Again, if Rex's prediction of a blue wave happens, you're going to see a massive gain for Democrats in the Senate. I personally feel like it's a lot closer to a 50-50 coin toss right now. I could really not be surprised if Republicans hold like a 51-49 margin. It will be because they have threaded a needle on some races. But I could also see Democrats getting up to 52, 53 even if things go their way and break big on election night. Rex, I'll let you go first. Who controls the Senate at the end of the night? And we still got Georgia that's going to hang out there for a couple weeks.
I think the Democratic Party is going to control the Senate. If you made me say right now, Roby, I'd say 51 or 52 seats when all is said and done at the end of the night.
All right, Shane, what do you think in terms of control of the Senate? Are we going to know on election night, and what do you predict?
I don't know that we'll know election night. There's some of me that still thinks this is going to drag into the following day. If you go along with Rex's prediction in terms of looking at all the voter demographics and believing what you believe at this moment, then it certainly could mean the Democrats take control of the Senate. Some of me still thinks that, some of those races like that are still local elections, maybe not nationalized elections that we've talked about before, that it's about the candidate from that state. And that maybe the Republicans can hold on to some of those seats in spite of being drugged down maybe by Trump in that state. So I would still, it's going to be close either way. I don't think there's going to be a huge advantage to either party in the Senate. It's going to be interesting. The Republicans will probably pick back up Alabama. So with Tommy Tuberville, so that means Arkansas will probably have 2.5 senators now since is from Camden and played at SAU and coached at ASU. So it'd be nice having a little, kind of an extra senator.
I think Tom Cotton would like you calling him half a senator, Shane. I think that's a low blow right there. So
no, I mean not in that context. Alabama will take some ownership of him, So we can't hope that he'll give us all of his attention.
Let's quickly. Does anybody disagree that the House stays in Democratic control?
No disagreement here. I think the Democrats will pick up a few.
Let's move on to Arkansas. How quickly after the polls close at 7:30, Rex, do we get a call that Trump has won Arkansas and Tom Cotton has won his Senate seat?
7:30 and 42 seconds. It'll just take the AP that long to get it out.
What do you think?
Won't even make it till 7:31 before those calls have been made.
What do you think is a good number for Ricky Harrington to get to have shown a good showing, and what would spell trouble for Tom Cotton if Ricky Harrington's at a certain number?
I think Ricky Harrington's going to get up over 30%. I mean, you're going to have the Democratic base who votes for him. You're going to have some moderates who have become a bit disenchanted with Senator Cotton. You might even have one or two Republicans who thinks he's becoming too much of a national senator and not paying attention to Arkansas. So I think the Libertarian probably ends up topping 30%. If he got to 40 now, that would be a real message to Senator Cotton. But regardless, I think he's going to end up topping 30%, which is pretty unheard of in any state for a Libertarian candidate.
What about you, Shane? What do you think? How well will Ricky Harrington do, and what sends a signal to Tom Cotton?
I agree with Rex. I mean, I think there's a possibility that he gets to 30%, 31%. I think if you get into that 38, 39%, certainly 40, then it causes you from the Cotton camp to kind of, maybe think about maybe doing some things differently over the next 6 years with a new term. But I think it's probably going to be closer to 30 than the mid 30s or upper 30s.
So Rick Crawford wins District 1 since he is unopposed. We're going to go ahead and put that one in the victory column. I think that Steve Womack and Bruce Westerman have advantages over their Democratic challengers, Celeste Williams and William Hanson. So let's move to CD2 and say, what do we predict to happen in CD2? Shane, I will come to you first on this one. Does French Hill squeak it out? Does Joyce Elliott squeak it out? Does one of them win by a bigger margin than expected? Give me your take.
I'd say right now it's too close to call. That's going to be what I tell you on this day because I've seen both candidates. I was at events and meetings with both candidates last week, both working very hard still. And I think it will go down to the last few boxes. But I think certainly Pulaski County and the number of votes over the last couple of weeks have been significant. And I remember us sitting on the desk, 2 years ago when Congressman Hill was running against Clark Tucker and trying to work out the math to see if there was a path where Clark Tucker could win with the Pulaski County numbers only being at a certain percentage. The math is going to be different this time. There's going to be a lot more voters in 2020 than there were in 2018. So you can certainly tell by the last several days, Congressman Hill has spent more time in Saline County. He was there on Thursday. I know he's been in Faulkner County. He's trying to work those outlying counties to try to rally some support and try to get more vote out in those counties because that's what he's going to have to win. But I think it's anybody's guess right now in terms of, and I really do think it's a toss-up.
Rex, I will expect a much more exact prediction from you than that toss-up that Shane just threw out there.
I do think, Roby, that it's close. I will put my prediction this way. I will predict that French Hill wins re-election. Should Joyce win, I wouldn't be totally surprised. But what the Elliott campaign needs is it needs what Shane said, the huge turnout in Pulaski County. And then out of that huge turnout, she needs somewhere up around 63, 64, 65% of the Pulaski County vote. And that is a very, very tough hill, if you will, to climb. for her right there. So I think that with big totals in Saline County, Faulkner County, that French Hill squeaks it out. Let's be honest, the only reason that this race is close this year, it should be a red district, is the fact that among a lot of urban voters in the Little Rock metropolitan area, Donald Trump is very, very unpopular. He is bringing out people, as Shane said, that did not vote 2 years ago. They're younger voters, a lot of minority voters. Those votes, especially in Pulaski County, are all going to the Democrat, and it's making it closer than it otherwise would be in this presidential election year.
I'll say that I think the fundamentals of that second district race lean slightly for French Hill, as Rex said. Joyce has got to get north of 60%. I believe that's true too. And I think she's got to stay in somewhere in the 30s, low to mid 30s in Saline and Faulkner County. And that's all doable. It's all very doable.
Yes.
It's just a requirement of turnout model and getting your people to the polls, whether it's early or on election day. But I think when we look at the math after this and we look at the results, if Joyce Elliott's successful, we're going to see her numbers in Saline and Faulkner definitely in the 30s. And we're going to see that number topping 60% in Pulaski County. And so if French Hill's successful, it's going to be he was able to hold on to enough of Pulaski County to keep that from happening. And he kept her from getting somewhat closer in those outlying counties than what a Democrat normally does.
Roby, we've heard a lot in the presidential race about college-educated suburban women who are now going for Joe Biden. I think that's the key in this congressional district race, specifically in Faulkner County and Saline County. What French Hill has to hope is that those women go for Joe Biden, but then they come back down and don't vote a straight ticket and come back and vote for him in the congressional race. If enough of those, again, college-educated suburban women tend to go for the Democrat, then we could indeed see a new congresswoman from the second congressional district. Those are going to be key. That's the key demographic, in my opinion, in the second congressional district.
All right. Well, it's been a fun race to cover. I'll say that it was unexpectedly competitive based on where we were months ago on that. All right, Shane, quickly, issues 1, 2, and 3. Which ones pass? Which ones fail?
I think 1 and 2 pass and 3 fails.
All right. What do you think, Rex?
I'm going to have to go with Shane on that one. I think 1 and 2 pass. I think 3 goes down. And your polling, Roby, New University of Arkansas polling also have pretty much shown those kind of numbers right now.
Yeah, well, we will see. All right, gentlemen, it has been fun, and we've got a lot to digest, and we're going to have a lot to process on hopefully Wednesday after election day. I'm not convinced that we're going to have all the numbers just yet. Yeah, and that would be a whole nother conversation and discussion about what's going on in that realm, and we don't have time for that today. Rex Nelson, Shane Broadway, as always, thank you, my friends, and we will be together on election night in somewhat of a similar fashion. So if people want to tune in, there's going to be a variety of ways to do that through Facebook and through our website, talkbusiness.net, and through KATV.com. So, gentlemen, I look forward to seeing you in a couple days.